Hi, I'm Chuck Samikian.
And I'm John Tolheimer. Welcome to the HR Stories Podcast,
where there's a lesson in every story. Oh, is it recording? Are we recording? We're recording. John, we are recording.
Hey, Sam, can you give him like a little tap on the shoulder or something so he knows that we're recording?
Hello.
Oh, my goodness. How are we doing today?
Yeah, I'm fine. It's just so interesting, John. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this. How do I shout from the rooftops? Do I post something on LinkedIn? Attention applicants. Because as you know, I'm reviewing resumes and we're hiring, and I'm hiring and I'm reviewing resumes, and I cannot tell you how badly people hurt themselves by not having. And I'm not talking about stellar resumes with colors and lines. And I mean, it doesn't matter. A black and white resume that's blocked out nice, that's fine. But for goodness sakes, put the dates of employment. I don't know how many people I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't put dates of employment. They have resumes that don't account for like the last 3 or 4 years. So they're sending outdated resumes. They have huge gaps in their employment, and you're like, what is going on? Or the job is located here in a certain location, and it might be a $15 an hour job or an $18 an hour job, and they're applying from 1,000 miles away or 2,000 miles away, maybe in from Oregon or Michigan or Pennsylvania. So when you do that, and you're not local and you don't have a local address, tell me what's going on. Sometimes I'll call folks and I'll say, hey, you look great. Are you planning to relocate? Oh, yeah. We just relocated last week and I'm starting to look for a job. Hey, hello. Can you update your address? Can you send a little note? Seriously. So anyways, ranting and raving. So that's...
Again, I think it's all about, right? And I think about this because I've written thousands of resumes, well, not thousands, but hundreds of resumes for myself and helped other people. And I think back in the day, I don't know how old you are, Chuck, but back in the day, do you remember doing like resumes on like onion paper? We used to call that typewriting paper onion paper.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
So you were literally either typing them up or making copies of them. And it was a big deal. It was really hard to do. Nowadays, you can customize it for every single job that you're applying for.
Yeah.
And I don't know why people aren't doing that, right? Why create just one resume? You should have, this is a resume for, I'm going to be a bar staff. This is a resume if I'm going to be in housekeeping. This is right? You should, I don't know. I just think that there's an opportunity there. I get it, right? I can think back to my first resumes. They were not the best. And I was thinking, it doesn't matter. They'll see my experience and it'll be great. But we're just human, right? We're looking at these things. We're human going, or worse, not worse yet, or it's going through an applicant tracking system looking for keywords. Are those keywords on that resume?
Yeah. And this is beyond this. John, it's 2025. Hello, applicants. Hello. It's 2025. Just help me to help you get a job. That's all I'm asking, the basic thing. So enough about that. What do you got, John?
So I was reading this article in MoneyWise so it was coming from Mike Rowe he actually worked at QVC.
Mike Rowe, the dirty jobs guy,
right? And so he's really into I don't want to say blue collar jobs or manual jobs, but the trades, right? He's really into the trades and making sure that people are applying for the trades and how important it is and really the things that are going on, right? And so he's looking at the statistics, and what he's saying is, and he has a whole Mike Rowe Works Foundation where he's helping individuals do it. And he's saying, there is a skill gap, of course, but he's saying there's a will gap. So people just don't want to work. And what he's saying is, and it's really interesting, he gets into there's 6.8 million able-bodied men are not just unemployed, but not even seeking employment. Now that statistic's a little off, but the bipartisan policy center says that the rate for men in their prime years, 25 to 54, has fallen from 98% September 1954 to 89% in January. So that's down 5%. No, sorry, 9% there, right? And so there's a less participation rate, and these individuals are just not working for whatever reason. And so maybe they're home taking care of the kids, right? So maybe that role has changed a little bit. But out of that 9%, 28% of that 9%, so you figured the numbers out there, aren't working because they don't want to. They're like, I don't want to work. And I know this because I have friends who have sons that are at home. They're not working.
Yeah.
And it drives me crazy because I'm like, well, what, like you parent, send them out into the world. And I get it, right? There's always challenges and stuff. But so I do think it's interesting because we know there's a skill gap. We know the trades are hurting for people, and we need to figure that out. And I think if you're in a trades industry, I think one of the best things you can do is try to figure out, like, how do I get people to want to be in this trade? And I tell people this all the time, like, go to your local community college and sponsor an HVAC class or sponsor something so you become the first choice, right?
Yeah.
Because people know you. I have a friend who's director of the sales and marketing department down at Middle Tennessee State University. And he, every semester, he brings in different businesses to talk to the class people, and they sponsor like events, like a sales event or something. And so they get to know those individuals. And so, of course, I'm going to apply for this company or this company because I know who they are. And if you're a smaller company or you're an HVAC company, you have to make that mark and get people like, we need people in there. So I think it's true. I think maybe some of the statistics are overblown, but we need to figure out a way to get people back in the workforce.
Well, you know what? It's what do they say about the boundaries and all that? You can't make anyone do anything, but you can create the parameters and boundaries which they can make their decisions. But let me go back to hello, applicants. Hello. No, John, we have people that apply for jobs. I go to this thing, and I've had this for years, not just here, everywhere. Everyone wants a job. Not everyone wants to work. Again, many people want a job. Not everyone wants to work. And so people will come in, they'll work, and they will disappear. People will apply like crazy 10, 15 times. You try and call them, you never hear back from them. Thinking, what is wrong with people like that? How do they keep jobs? But I do see, and maybe it's amongst, there's my brother-in-law was a psychologist at one point, and he was talking about the working poor. And you and I may have talked about this in the past, but there's a group of folks that seem to go from job to job to job that don't ever seem to grasp onto something and maintain that job stability long enough to then let it take hold. And then they could kind of climb that ladder, build some stability. And I don't know why. And I imagine a lot of those folks have got to be caught up in this statistic. In addition to your friends' kids that are sitting at home and
I mean, these are college educated kids, and they're sitting at home. And I'm like, but again, right? Is it the will? What is it? Is the workplace? And again, we know, right? One of the challenges for this generation, and that means the Generation Z, is that anxiety levels are much higher. And so it may be, just even thinking about going in there, and that just causes more anxiety. So I'm not making that move. We probably didn't have that luxury, that privilege. We were like, okay, you got to get a job. I remember, I had a job I graduated from college on Saturday or Sunday. I was working on Monday. And so
I know. Well, I'm glad to see all three of my kids have jobs now, so I don't have
yeah.
to put that pressure on them. But here's another reason why I think people leave jobs, and this is from the is a Business Journal article about HR leaders face pressure to enforce unpopular work policies, and I actually see this out there a lot where and I want to say it, oh, is it a certain generation or not? I don't know. I can't say I put my finger on it, but there are people out there and a lot of employees don't want to follow work policies. And so it may not be popular. Hey, guess what? You got to take out the nose stud. Hey, guess what? I mean, I know you want to grow the beard, and those of you that are watching on YouTube, maybe you see Chuck's fantastic semi beard. But you want to do that, that's fine. I had a guy the other day, he had a full-blown mustache, a manager, full-blown mustache. Then he decided he wants to grow a beard with the mustache. I said, dude, you got to shave the mustache and then let it all come in at the same time. And he's looking at me like I've just asked him to do something that is so egregious.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm
yeah.
like, you look like you haven't shaved in 3 days. You don't look like I do with my semi half beard. You got to all have it. So anyways, I see that a lot. And, HR is tasked with, pushing these internal policies. But I will tell you, there are policies a lot of times that HR people are saying they don't support, such as the return to work policies and other top-down mandates that just come down, and they're saying that it's widening a lot of divides, and so it is something. So anyways, I riff on that. I'll stop talking. You go.
No. A couple things came to mind, right? And so the one thing is, I remember back in the day, my hair was really long. Not really long. It was long. I'm not going to say it was really long, but it was long. And I remember talking to some friends. They were applying for Disney, right? Disney World was the place to be. High tech, great, great jobs, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't apply because I would have had to cut my hair back then. Now,
right.
Now, but that was the thing. Like, you had to have it up short. Now I'd be fine. I got my short hair.
You've got great short hair, John.
And so it's just, I get that, right? And and again, you're coming in, you want your freedom, you want to be doing, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm in the corporate world now. And some of these things have nothing to do with performance, has nothing to do with branding. It's just somebody like, oh, I don't like the way that person looks, so I'm gonna, right? And so now we're creating these things, which kind of leads us into our big story today.
I know the big story, folks. Right. High heels in the workplace. Can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah. So we'll get to that in a second. But the other thing I was thinking about is when you said that return to work, right? And so I think it's a perfect example of the challenges of HR, right? And so we talk legal stuff and we talk best practices, but a lot of times HR professionals and leaders and managers at the same level are facing, I got direction from here and I need to push this out. I may not agree with it. Mm-hmm. But that's what we're doing for no apparent reason other than the boss says we need to do it. So we're caught in that, and we want to do what's right because it's our company, our job, and we want to make sure, okay, that's what the boss says, we need to do it. And I think that's why, and I talk about this with my managers, I think that's why management is hard. I think it's why HR is hard, and really coming up with how do we deal with these things can be really important. So for me, this is kind of my thought on this. When I was in corporate America and have to deal with these things, there was two choices, right? I could push back, or I could just swallow it and go forward. And there were some things I learned, like, you know what? Not a big deal. I may not agree with it, but we're going to do it. And then where the other times when I wanted to push back, what I learned is I get a better result if I've had built trust with that person. Right. And so if that person trusts me and then knows that I'm coming from a good place,
Yeah,
they're going to
that makes
listen much
sense. Sure.
more to me than if they're like, well, that's just John and he's just angry all the time. And so building that relationships up is going to be important to make sure that you're a trustworthy partner, especially as HR person, because they're going to look to you to roll this stuff out. But you also have to present clear, concise data like, hey, this is what we're hearing out in the market. This is what John and Chuck said on the podcast, and there's this great website, and blah, blah, blah. Right. And so going into some of that stuff, I think we need to be strategic with our approach for sure.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of stuff coming out of the HR Stories podcast today. John, do you want to get into our story about high heels and
I am looking forward to this story because it's an interesting story. I got to tell you this story. So, I do a lot of training, and I always tell stories that either we've told on the HR Stories podcast or that I find interesting. And so the story today, which I'm going to kind of segue this into where you're going, Chuck. So let me see if I can do this. Was in Wichita, Kansas City. There was a gentleman's club called Mother's Choice or Pleasures or something like that. And they were treating their dancers as independent contractors, which I think we talked about as another story. Yes. I think it was one of your early stories. And so we talk about that, right? We talk about how, God, what is this and how, and just, I think sometimes we don't look at an organization and go, oh, that's an employee situation. What's going on, right? We go to casinos, we go to gentlemen's clubs, we check them out, and we're just thinking about what they're providing, and we're not thinking about them as an employer, right? And so I think this is another example of that in your story. I don't know. That was a really weird segue, but.
Well, John, welcome back. Welcome back here on the HR Stories podcast. We are inclusive and we are welcoming John back because there's a lesson in every story. And today, speaking of shoes and heels, we're taking a walk in someone else's shoes, literally, because we're talking about high heels, cocktail servers, and a lawsuit that's putting a major employer's grooming and dress code policy on trial.
Well, of course, I've heard of dress code disputes before. In fact, we talked about a bunch of them, but this one actually involves a health condition, right?
Yes, that is right. And so that is the whole angle of today's story. I want you to meet Ms. Jacqueline Lopez Dupree, or maybe Dupree. Okay, Jacqueline Lopez Dupree. Jacqueline started working as a cocktail server at the MGM National Harbor all the way back in 2016. And at the time, like all servers, she was required to wear black high heels as part of the uniform. But soon after, things started to go downhill, literally and figuratively, for her feet.
So when you say all servers, do you mean both female and male servers?
Of course the guys wore high heels, John.
Okay.
Oh, no, of course they did not. Come on.
Just checking.
No, actually, no. You are correct. It was just the female servers. The male servers, as we would, I guess, maybe there were not male servers, John. Maybe they were all the cocktail servers were female, but anyone that was a cocktail server had to wear. So that's a great question.
Yeah. And so again, right, going back, she's wearing these high heels. That's when her health issues started, right? That was kind of what was happening.
Yeah. So Jacqueline was diagnosed with plantar fasciitis, which, for those that don't know, it's a pretty painful condition involving inflammation of the tissues along the bottom of the foot. And so beginning in 2017, she started requesting a reasonable accommodation to wear flat, supportive shoes, something her doctor repeatedly recommended.
And so MGM just denied those requests?
Well, for the most part, yes. Though in 2019, after MGM sent a follow-up request to her physician, so it sounds like they were taking it seriously, at least through some sort of interactive process here.
Right.
So they finally approved the accommodation. And so from July 2019 until December 2021, now count that up, July 2019 to 2020, 2021, that's about 2.5 years. So two
Okay.
and a half years go by, and Jacqueline wears black Skechers style shoes. They were flat, they were supportive, and they were appropriate for her condition.
All right, so that's it. Great. We solved that one. What's our next story, Chuck?
You would think, however, MGM later claimed that her Skechers weren't in compliance with their appearance standards. In fact, December 2021 or January 2022, MGM issued a detailed memo banning specific styles of footwear. Just to go over that quick list: ballerinas, Birkenstocks, slippers, wedges, flip-flops, slingbacks, whatever those are, Crocs, sneakers, or shoes with excessive strapping or ornamentation. You name it. Now, my guess is new manager got a job there, new department leader, maybe the president of the company walks through 2.5 years later and says, why is she wearing tennis shoes? She needs to be in heels. So I don't know.
Yeah,
But
right. And that's what
happened.
I was thinking too. I was like, oh, okay, so something changed that they made that decision, right? And it would be, I don't know, like, was that already in the dress code? Did they change the dress code? Was it just more formalized? Right? All those things get in there. But anyway, the Skechers that she was wearing got caught up in that, right?
Yeah. So even though her doctor reissued a medical note in April of 2022, MGM said she was violating the dress code, and they terminated her a month later in May 2022. So they claimed she had been progressively disciplined for appearance violations.
Oh, that's rough. Especially if she had been doing her job well all along and she'd been there since 2016. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I'm guessing those folks were not listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story, because this is a great lesson. And anyways, Jacqueline thought the same thing. I'm doing my job well, and she files a federal lawsuit citing disability discrimination and retaliation under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and because she's in Maryland. Once again, folks, listen up. You got to know what state you're in. And if you're in Maryland, there's a handful of states that I would say you're going to have extra laws. And there's something called the Maryland Fair Employment Practices Act. And in March 2024, the court refused to dismiss her claims, ruling they were genuine. And there were genuine questions about whether MGM failed to accommodate her condition, and did MGM retaliate against her for speaking up.
And she didn't stop there, right?
No, actually, she started a petition now to change. They pushed the wrong person, right? The wrong button. She starts a petition to change MGM's dress code, publicly advocating for footwear that doesn't cause pain or discrimination.
So, Chuck, what does this mean? Like, what's the bigger picture for, I would say, managers in HR, especially those ones that are in the hospitality industry?
Sure. So what I want to say is this case is, as of this month, May of 2025, it is going forward. And so there's no resolution yet. Okay. I think there will be a resolution either publicly or privately, but it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I hope we can get our hands on the final court ruling. But look, it's a big one. First, dress codes are not sacred. That's the first thing that we all need to understand. dress codes aren't sacred. And I told you offline or off camera, this could be a rabbit hole. You and I could sit
Right.
and go through this over and over again. And tell you the truth, I'm not even I actually like dress codes and I actually like to see them, but they are not sacred anymore. And just because you've always required something like heels doesn't mean it's legal, especially if it causes medical harm or applies to certain genders.
Well, Chuck, I mean, this just isn't about one case, right? In fact, more companies are moving away from rigid gender dress codes altogether. Virgin Atlantic dropped its gender dress code policies in 2022. Walmart, Target, Goldman Sachs have embraced more casual, flexible options. And according to a study by Dazuna, fewer than 0.08% of job ads even mention dress codes anymore. And those that say casual, business casual. So it's really time, I think, to let the heels go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was shocked by that study. And like you and I have said many times, it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree or like it, the law a lot of times is the law. Now, the Goldman Sachs thing is interesting because they were always very button up, suits, ties,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But they've gone to a more relaxed look. I can remember working at Disney and they had guidelines for heels. I think women could wear flats, but they could only most of the women wore. I mean, we're talking walk around the park wore these heels. So I think it was kind of expected. But anyways, is it time to let the heels go? Probably. It might be wise, especially when as far back, maybe 10 years ago, National Law Review, legal experts were sounding the alarm. They pointed out that requiring high heels for women, but not imposing similar standards on men would be could be a text example of sex discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which is why we now allow men to wear an earring in the workplace because you could not tell men and women, and so it got really conflungered, and you have to apply it equally. Right?
Yeah, right. And making it and genderizing, I don't think that's a word. Degendering dress codes is really important, right? Because again, being equal across the board becomes really important, kind of doing that, right? Because here's what's happening, right? The law doesn't look at intent, it looks at impact. If the dress code places a heavier burden on women, like forcing them to wear shoes that cause pain or injury, that's unequal treatment.
Yeah. Now here's the interesting thing, and this was in the court document. So always in the HR Stories podcast, we're going to dig a little deeper. MGM was trying to use the word costume.
Oh.
Like and that's a Disney thing. Disney would, they got away with a lot of stuff for many, many, many years by saying, "Oh, this is a costume," and
Hooters
they said your high heels are part of the costume,
right?
That is expected. But anyways, the article made it clear from National Law Review: employers who maintain gender-specific dress codes must tread carefully. If you're enforcing policies that disproportionately affect one gender, you better have a solid, non-discriminatory justification, and fashion just doesn't cut it.
Plus, we've seen court cases back that up, right? The Jesperin versus Harris, the Ninth Circuit raised serious concerns about grooming policies that create unequal burden based on gender, even though the company claimed it was all about branding, right?
Yes, the branding thing. And that was another thing MGM claimed. This is our brand. These are the costumes. I remember years, and we talk about Disney. I worked at Disney, so I had the short hair. I had no problem. I liked the Disney look, and I still have it.
Short hair.
Back then, the Disney look, hair above the ears and off the collar. Boom. Now, I drive through and I see security guards look like something out of Duck Dynasty, okay? Right. Or like the caveman from the Geico commercials. But neither here nor there. I used to teach orientation, and they called it traditions. We had a dress code. So you're hired, and we would give you the dress code for orientation. Men had to wear ties. Women had to wear dresses or skirts, right? I mean, it was on there. I wish I could find all that stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
And I had someone show up. It was a woman, and she was wearing pants, like a pantsuit, like think like a Hillary Clinton type of thing. We sent her home, would not let her through orientation class because she was not wearing a dress, pants. I couldn't. This is going to be 1988.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
1988. So things like that would not happen today.
No. And it's interesting how that's changing, but I think, right, there are a lot of organizations that have specific dress code requirements. Like you go into a fast food restaurant, they're all wearing a specific type of shirt, maybe black pants, right? And so it's still out there, and there's so many things that we need to kind of be concerned about and really kind of look at and make sure that we're being very careful what we're doing. But I think you said it earlier, we can still have dress codes, right? One of my favorite stories I share, Chuck, is that there was a Fortune 500 CEO, female CEO, and just got very frustrated with all the time HR managers were spending on dress codes violations. And she says, that's it. I'm changing the dress code, and I'm changing it to 2 words. Dress appropriately. And I read the article, and I couldn't help but think of HR directors and HR managers across the country going, no, they don't know what that means. And so giving guidelines, I think, is critical to be like, hey, you can wear business casual, and this is what that means. Or we can dress casual, this is what that means. Or a lot of companies say, hey, if you're meeting with a client or if you're meeting there, you need to look professional because this is the brand, this is what we're going to do. But if you're at home or you're in the office, you're not going to meet with anybody, hey, then dress business casual, right? And kind of doing that in there.
So the thing here, John, high heels may look sharp, but if they're hurting people, especially when the employer has been medically advised otherwise, it is time to rethink what professional appearance means.
So what's your bottom line, Chuck?
Sure. So if dress codes demand pain from one group of employees just to maintain a certain image, it's not just going to be outdated, it's dangerous, and it's potentially discriminatory, and it is ripe for a lawsuit.
All right, so what are the lessons for HR practitioners? Let's go through our checklist, right? Let's go through this. Number 1, audit your dress code. Watch out for gendered language or rules that might unintentionally discriminate. And okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, honor medical documentation, right? That's the whole ADA. And again, right? I haven't dove into this enough, but is going through the interactive process, and does that fall under the ADA? Is that, again, if she can't walk, that would be a major life activity, walking. It's hurting her walking. So yeah, it would fall under the ADA. I didn't need to dive into that. A doctor note isn't a suggestion. It's starting point for an ADA required interactive process. So dive into it, kind of figure that out in there. Number 3, consider long-term accommodations. Temporary fixes may not cut it if the condition is chronic. In this case, it sounds like they gave her, okay, good, you're going to wear your Skechers, that's fine. And then something happened where they went and changed it, right? And so kind of doing that. Avoid retaliation. Chuck and I talk about this all the time. 58% of EEOC cases involve retaliation. And so just being aware of that and kind of going, all right, let's not retaliate. Just because someone says, hey, I need a reasonable accommodation or files a complaint, don't allow that, especially for the managers and supervisors, to discipline that person, fire that person, demote that person, just because that happened. Play it out. Even if that employee is not the greatest employee, play it out and then manage that person by performance. And then finally, update policies annually. Dress code should evolve.
Yeah.
Period.
Period. Yep. So wrapping this up, in the end, this isn't just about shoes. It's about balancing policy with compassion and also ensuring our standards don't put people in harm's way.
Especially when those standards are more about appearance than performance. But why were high heels even part of the uniform in the first place? Was it such a big deal for MGM to take this all the way to a lawsuit? Like, what were they holding on to, Chuck? Tell me, what was the whole point?
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question. MGM never really explained in court, but it, like a lot of hospitality and casino businesses, there's this belief, maybe it's a legacy belief of sort, that heels project elegance, polish, or maybe glamour.
Yeah, but that kind of image doesn't justify ignoring somebody's mental condition. This wasn't everybody on the floor. It was one individual working 40 hours a week in a 24/7 casino. Probably no one's going to go, oh, look, she's wearing flat shoes. I'm not going to work here anymore. Or I'm not going to
Yes.
go here anymore.
Well, yeah, I don't know. You're right. I mean, the ADA doesn't give you a branding exception. And when the branding is only enforced on women, now you've got a potential Title VII issue. It's just not easy being a business owner anymore, I guess. I don't know, but it's tied to a look policy, and it's hard to justify legally if it creates medical harm.
Right. And they probably thought it created uniform consistency. I get that. But that doesn't override the ADA requirements. And worst of all, it reveals gendered expectations where a burden of appearance standards disproportionately impacts women.
Yes, sure. So, hey, that's it for this week's HR story. I hope it was a great learning experience for all of us. Thank you for walking us or with us as we went through this case. And we hope you'll think twice about what your dress code says, folks.
Yeah, and I love that whole walking through the case, Chuck. I like that little thing in there. That was nice. So until next time, stay compliant, stay curious, and stay comfortable. This has been the HR Stories podcast,
where there's a lesson in every story.
Your hair looks good, Chuck.
Thank you.